The morning air in Mariwa City was crisp, the sun casting golden rays through the large windows of the luxurious mansion. A delicious aroma of sizzling eggs and freshly brewed tea filled the air, but there was no warmth in the kitchen. Instead, an unsettling silence hung between two women, one stirring a pot, the other scrolling endlessly on her phone, her long acrylic nails tapping against the screen. "Good morning, Mama," Aisha greeted, her voice soft but hopeful. Her mother-in-law Sandra did not even lift her head. Instead, she chuckled at something on her phone, crossing her legs dramatically as she continued scrolling through Facebook. Aisha sighed, used to the cold treatment but still hurt by it. She placed a plate of food on the dining table and called out, "Mama, breakfast is ready." Sandra finally looked up, her perfectly drawn eyebrows arching in disapproval. She pushed her phone aside and sauntered to the table, her tight dress clinging to her body like she was 20 years younger. With an exaggerated sniff, she picked up a fork and poked the eggs. "This food looks so plain," she muttered. You young girls don't even know how to cook properly these days. My son used to eat like a king when he was with Anita." Aisha's stomach twisted at the mention of Anita, her husband's ex-girlfriend. Sandra dropped the fork, unimpressed. "I'll just order something nice online." With that, she picked up her phone again, swiping through her favorite restaurant's menu. Aisha clenched her fist but remained quiet. She had learned that answering back only made things worse. When she turned to leave, Sandra's voice cut through the air. "And don't take the TV remote, I have a show to watch." Aisha froze. It was becoming a routine, her mother-in-law always switching the channel whenever she wanted to watch something. But today, something inside her burned. She turned to face Sandra, forcing a polite smile. "I was watching something before I came to serve breakfast." Sandra leaned back, giving her a smug look. "And I want to watch now. Do you have a problem?" Aisha swallowed her frustration and walked away, knowing that arguing was useless. But as she reached the bedroom, tears pricked her eyes. How long will she endure this? That evening, when her husband Brian came home, Sandra was all smiles. She hugged him tightly, laughing and joking as if nothing had happened. "My son, you look tired. Have you eaten? Should I warm something for you?" Aisha watched in disbelief. The same woman who had spent the whole day treating her with cruelty was now acting like a caring mother. Brian kissed Aisha's forehead. "Hey babe, how was your day?" Sandra turned away, pretending to wipe an imaginary tear. "Oh, it was fine. I was feeling a little lonely today." Brian frowned. "Lonely? But Aisha was here the whole day." Sandra sighed dramatically. "You know, son, some people can be present but still make the house feel empty." Aisha's heart pounded. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Brian's brows knitted in confusion, but before he could ask further, Sandra quickly changed the topic. "I was just telling Aisha about Anita today," she said casually, eyeing Aisha for a reaction. "You know she got a promotion at her new job. Such an ambitious girl." Aisha's fingers curled into a fist. Enough was enough. Later that night, as they lay in bed, she finally spoke. "Brian, I need to talk to you." He turned to her concerned. "What is it, babe?" She hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Your mother, she treats me differently when you're not around." Brian sat up. "What do you mean?" Aisha's voice trembled. "She ignores me, insults my cooking, switches the TV when I'm watching, and keeps bringing up Anita." She looked into his eyes. "I try to respect her, but she's making my life miserable." A storm passed through Brian's eyes. He had suspected something, but never thought it was this bad. His jaw clenched. "I'll talk to her." Aisha quickly shook her head. "I don't want to cause a fight between you two." Brian exhaled sharply, conflicted, but as he held Aisha close, one thing became clear. This wasn't just a small misunderstanding. A silent war was brewing in their home, and sooner or later, it will explode. Aisha woke up early the next morning, determined to start the day on a positive note. She had convinced Brian not to confront his mother just yet. She wanted to try handling things on her own first. Maybe, just maybe, if she kept showing kindness, Sandra would change. She hummed softly as she set the table for breakfast, placing warm mandazis, tea, and scrambled eggs neatly on the plates. Just as she was about to call Sandra, the older woman strutted into the kitchen in her silk robe, a phone in one hand and a steaming cup of coffee in the other. She took one look at the food and scoffed. "Again with these boring meals?" Aisha bit her tongue. Sandra sighed dramatically and waved her hand. "I saw a recipe for a 5-star breakfast on Facebook yesterday. You should try it sometime." Aisha forced a smile. "Would you like me to make something else for you, Mama?" Sandra raised an eyebrow, studying Aisha with amusement. "Look at you acting all nice, but I see right through you. You're just pretending, hoping I like you." Aisha's heart clenched, but she refused to let Sandra see how much her words hurt. "I'm just trying to make this home peaceful, Mama." Sandra chuckled, shaking her head. "Home? Sweetheart, this is my house. You're just a visitor." Aisha's breath caught in her throat, but before she could respond, Brian walked in, stretching his arms. "Good morning, ladies," he said cheerfully. Sandra's face transformed instantly. "Good morning, my son." She rushed to serve him tea, her previous hostility disappearing like it had never existed. Aisha watched in disbelief. It was like watching an actress switch roles within seconds. Brian took a sip of his tea and smiled. "Babe, this is really good." Sandra smirked. "She tries." Aisha clenched her jaw, but Brian seemed not to notice. He kissed her cheek. "I have a long day at work today. Will you be okay?" Before Aisha could answer, Sandra spoke up. "Of course she will. I'll keep her company." Aisha stiffened. "That's what I'm afraid of," she thought. As soon as Brian left, Sandra dropped the act. She leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed. "Let's get one thing straight, little girl. You may have married my son, but that doesn't mean you belong here." Aisha looked up confused. "Mama, why do you dislike me so much? What have I done?" Sandra's eye darkened. "You took my son away from Anita. She was perfect for him. She knew how to keep him happy." Aisha's voice wavered. "Brian chose me. We love each other." Sandra laughed coldly. "Love? Let me tell you something, darling. Love is not enough. If you think being a good wife will make you stay here, you are mistaken." Aisha swallowed hard, her hands trembling. Just then, Sandra's phone buzzed with a message. Her face lit up. She turned away, typing excitedly. "For my lunch date," she announced smugly. She grabbed her purse and strutted toward the door. "Clean the house while I'm gone. Make yourself useful." The door slammed behind, leaving Aisha alone in silence. Tears pricked her eyes, but she wiped them away. She wasn't going to let Sandra break her. She took a deep breath and picked up the broom. Little did she know the worst days was yet to come. Aisha wiped the sweat from her forehead as she finished mopping the floor. The house was spotless, but exhaustion weighed heavily on her shoulders. Sandra had left hours ago for the mysterious lunch date, and Aisha had spent the entire time cleaning, hoping that maybe, just maybe, if she worked hard enough, the mother-in-law would find a reason to like her. But deep down, she knew the truth. Sandra had no intention of accepting her. She sighed and slumped into the couch, picking up the remote. She needed a moment to relax. Just as she was about to switch to her favorite drama, the front door swung open, and Sandra strutted in, her heels clicking against the tiles. Aisha tensed. Sandra's eyes immediately darted on the TV. "Oh, so this is what you do all day?" she sneered. "Sit around and watch useless programs while my son works hard." Aisha's heart pounded. "Mama, I just finished cleaning. I was resting for a few minutes." Sandra snorted. "Resting? You young girls are so lazy these days." She snatched the remote from Aisha's hand and switched the channel. "I was watching something before I left. I hope you didn't mess up the show." Aisha clenched her fist, willing herself to stay calm. Sandra plopped onto the couch, crossing her legs dramatically. "By the way, I invited some friends over this evening. Make sure you cook something nice and don't embarrass me with your bland food." Aisha blinked in shock. "Mama, you didn't tell me about this earlier." Sandra waved her hand dismissively. "And? You're my daughter-in-law, aren't you? You should always be ready to host guests." Aisha wanted to scream, but she bit her tongue. She couldn't afford to start a fight. Aisha moved swiftly in the kitchen, stirring the stew while keeping an eye on the rice. She wanted everything to be perfect. Just as she was setting the table, the doorbell rang. Loud, excited voices filled the house as Sandra's friends poured in, their heels clicking and perfume filling the air. "Ah, Sandra, you're glowing," one of the women said, hugging her tightly. Sandra laughed. "Of course, darling, I take care of myself." Aisha stood politely, waiting to greet them, but as she opened her mouth, Sandra spoke first. "This is Aisha, my son's wife," she said with a fake smile. "She's still learning how to be a proper wife." The woman giggled, exchanging knowing glances. Aisha felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. Sandra turned to her. "Go bring her something to drink." Aisha swallowed the lump in her throat and nodded, walking towards the kitchen. As she poured the juice into glasses, she overheard their conversation. "So Sandra," one of the women teased, "how is she? Is she giving you grandkids yet?" Sandra sighed dramatically. Don't even start. I don't even know what's taking her so long. A woman who can't conceive quickly is a burden to her husband." Aisha froze, her hands tightening around the tray. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she forced them back. She had been married to Brian for only a few months, yet Sandra already saw her as a failure. She took a deep breath, straightened her back, and walked back to the living room, balancing the tray in her hands. Sandra glanced at her with a smirk. "Don't just stand there, serve my friends." Aisha nodded, placing the drinks in front of the guest, but as she bent to set the last glass down, one of Sandra's friends deliberately nudged the tray. The glass tipped over, spilling juice all over the woman's expensive dress. A shocked silence filled the room. The woman gasped, "Oh God, my dress!" Sandra shot up from her seat. "Aisha, how careless can you be?" Aisha's hands trembled. I'm sorry. It was an accident." Sandra clicked her tongue and shook her head dramatically. "You can't even serve drinks properly. No wonder you can't give my son a child." Aisha breath hitched. Words stung like a slap. Her vision blurred, but she held back her tears. She wouldn't let Sandra see her cry. Instead, she whispered, "Excuse me," and she walked away, locking herself in the bedroom. She collapsed onto the bed, covering her face with her hands. How much longer could she take this? The next few days felt like a slow torture for Aisha. She spent her time cleaning, cooking, and trying to keep the peace. But Sandra's relentless behavior only worsened. Each time Aisha made an effort to be kind, Sandra's sarcasm and insult grew sharper. One evening, after a long day of work, Aisha decided to take a walk in the garden to clear her mind. The soft breeze calmed her, but her heart remained heavy. Her thoughts kept circling back to Brian. Why hadn't he noticed how his mother treated her? As she sat on the bench, tears slipped down her cheeks. She had tried so hard to fit into this family, but nothing seemed to be enough for Sandra. Aisha sniffled, wiping her tears. Just then, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Brian. "Hey babe, I'm thinking of coming home early tonight. I miss you. How are you doing?" A wave of relief washed over Aisha. At least she had one person who cared. She quickly typed back, "I'm okay, love. Just a little tired. Can't wait to see you." Her phone rang a moment later. "Hey, how's my girl?" Brian's voice was warm and comforting. "I'm good, babe," she replied, forcing a smile, though her heart was still heavy. "Just missing you a little." Brian chuckled. "I miss you too. Let's have a quiet dinner tonight, just the two of us. I'll even help with cooking." Aisha's heart fluttered. "I'd like that. I'll be waiting." But as she hung up, a sinking feeling returned. No matter how much Brian loved her, Sandra's influence was too strong. How long could she pretend everything was okay? Aisha's stomach churned the next morning as she prepared breakfast. Her mother-in-law had been on her case again, calling her lazy and useless for not giving Brian a child yet. She entered the dining room, trying to keep her composure as Sandra sat at the table, scrolling through her phone, her usual mask of perfection in place. "Morning, Mama," Aisha greeted, setting down the tray of food. Sandra didn't even look up. "You know, Aisha, a woman's job is to give her husband children. If you can't even do that, you might as well pack your bags." Aisha froze, her heart sinking. "Mama, I'm trying. It's not that simple." Sandra snorted. "Trying? What's that supposed to mean? I don't have time for excuses." Aisha felt the weight of her words pressed down on her chest, but she held her ground. "I'm doing my best." Sandra's eyes narrowed, a wicked smile tugging at her lips. "Well, your best isn't good enough. If you want to keep Brian, you'd better start delivering soon. No one wants a wife who can't give them children." That afternoon, Aisha couldn't shake the weight of Sandra's words from her mind. She felt trapped, as if everything she did was never good enough. What was wrong with her? Why couldn't she give Brian the family his mother so desperately wanted? She spent the day in a haze, unable to focus on anything. After a particularly difficult conversation with Sandra, Aisha decided to take action. She needed to get pregnant and fast to prove herself to her mother-in-law. She made an appointment with the fertility doctor and secretly visited the clinic. The doctor assured her that there was nothing wrong, but the pressure was building. Aisha wanted to fix things, to please Sandra, and maybe, just maybe, if she could give Brian a child, the animosity would finally stop. As she left the clinic, Aisha felt a strange mix of relief and guilt. She wasn't sure if this was the right way to go about things, but she needed to find a solution. Days passed, and the tension in the house continued to grow. Brian had been so busy with work that he barely noticed the strain between Aisha and his mother. Aisha felt invisible, caught in the middle of a war she didn't start. One evening, Brian came home earlier than usual. He noticed Aisha was unusually quiet and asked if everything was okay. Aisha hesitated but decided to confide in him. "Brian, your mom has been treating me terribly. She keeps telling me that I'm not enough for you, that I can't even give you children." Brian's face darkened. "What? Why didn't you tell me earlier?" "I didn't want to start a fight," Aisha admitted, "but I can't keep pretending everything is okay." Brian looked on, but just as he was about to respond, Sandra entered the room with a big smile. "Is everything alright here?" she asked sweetly, her eyes flickering between Aisha and Brian. "Everything is fine, Mama," Brian replied, though his tone lacked conviction. Aisha's heart raced. She knew that Sandra was pretending to be innocent, but her lies were becoming too much. That night, Aisha and Brian finally had the long-awaited conversation. He pulled her close, his hands gently resting on her back. "Aisha, I had no idea it had gotten this bad with my mom," Brian admitted. "I'm so sorry. I should have seen it earlier." Aisha looked up at him, her voice shaking. "Brian, I love you, but I can't keep living like this. Your mom makes me feel like I'm worthless. I can't do it anymore." Brian kissed her forehead. "I'll talk to her. You don't have to go through this alone." As they held each other, Aisha felt a flicker of hope. Maybe things could change. The following day, Brian sat down with Sandra, determined to confront her about her behavior. Aisha stayed in the other room, her heart pounding as she listened to their conversation unfold. "Sandra, we need to talk," Brian said firmly. Sandra looked up, feigning innocence. "What's wrong now, son?" I've been hearing things about how you've been treating Aisha. Brian continued, his voice growing more serious. This needs to stop, ma'am. She's my wife and I won't let you disrespect her anymore. Sandra raised an eyebrow as though Brian had just insulted her. Disrespect? Brian, you're being dramatic. I'm just trying to guide your wife. She's still new to all this. Brian shook his head. It's not about guidance, ma'am. It's about respect. She's my partner and you've been treating her like she doesn't belong. I won't tolerate it anymore. Sandra's face softened slightly, but her eyes remained defiant. I just want what's best for you, Brian. I wanted you to marry Anita. She was the one who knew how to take care of you. Brian's eyes narrowed. Anita is not the woman I want. I chose Aisha because I love her. If you can't accept that, then I don't know what to say. There was a long silence. Sandra's lips quivered, but she didn't speak. Brian's voice softened. I'm not asking you to like her, but I'm asking you to respect her. Please, ma'am, for me. Aisha, listening from the other room, wiped away a tear. She had never heard Brian speak so firmly about their relationship. It gave her hope that things might finally change. The days following the confrontation were tense, but slowly things began to shift. Sandra's attitude wasn't immediately perfect, but she started to tone down her harsh comments. Aisha didn't expect things to change overnight, but the small gestures of kindness were a sign that Brian's words had made an impact. Aisha's stomach fluttered with anticipation. One morning, when Sandra entered the kitchen with a slightly awkward smile, "Good morning, Aisha," she said, her voice softer than usual. Aisha froze, unsure how to respond. It had been so long since Sandra had greeted her like this. "Good morning, Mama," she replied, her voice softly. Sandra hesitated before sitting down at the table. "Listen, I've been thinking about what Brian said the other day. I'm sorry for being hard on you." Aisha's heart skipped a beat. Could this be real? "I'm not perfect," Sandra continued, her tone surprisingly sincere. "I may not have agreed with your marriage at first, but I see how much Brian loves you. I'll try to be better." Aisha smiled, tears welling up in her eyes. "Thank you, Mama. That means a lot to me." Later that afternoon, Sandra surprised Aisha by offering to help her with lunch. As they worked side by side, Aisha realized that the tension between them was slowly melting away. It wasn't going to be easy, but maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to coexist. As the days went by, Sandra's attitude softened more. She stopped making cruel remarks about Aisha's cooking, and instead she offered tips with a touch of humor. She even started asking about Aisha's day and offered advice not as a mother-in-law but as someone who genuinely cared. And then, one evening, as Aisha sat on the couch, Sandra walked over with a hesitant smile. "You know, Aisha," she began, "I think you'll make a great mother. I was hard on you because I wanted to see you succeed. I see how much you love Brian, and I'm starting to see what he saw in you." Aisha's heart swelled with gratitude. "Thank you, Mama." For the first time since her wedding, Aisha felt like she was finally a part of this family. She wasn't just Brian's wife, she was starting to be accepted for who she was. And as time passed, Aisha found herself growing stronger, more confident, and hopeful that with patience, love, and understanding, even the most difficult relationship could heal. The weeks following the heartfelt conversation between Aisha and Sandra were filled with hope. Every day was a little bit better, and although the relationship between the two women was still a work in progress, Aisha couldn't help but feel a small sense of peace. Brian had kept his promise and had been checking in more frequently, ensuring that his mother and wife were starting to find common ground. One afternoon, Aisha was sitting in the garden, sipping a cup of tea when Sandra walked up to her, looking more relaxed than she had ever seen her. "Aisha," Sandra said softly, "I know I haven't been the best mother-in-law, and for that, I'm truly sorry." Aisha put down her cup, stunned by the sincerity in Sandra's voice. "It's okay, Mama. We've both had our challenges." Sandra sat down beside her. "You know, I used to be so wrapped up in my own world that I didn't see how hard it was for you to come into this family. But Brian is right. You are his wife. You deserve respect." Aisha smiled warmly, her weight lifting off her shoulders. "Thank you, Mama. That means a lot to me." For the first time, it felt like there were two women, no longer a daughter-in-law and a mother-in-law, just two people trying to build a better relationship. Despite their growing understanding, Aisha could still feel the pressure from Sandra when it came to the topic of children. Sandra often brought up the issue, not in a harsh way, but with subtly comments like, "Aisha, you know Brian's getting older. You need to start thinking about giving him a child." Aisha hated this conversation, but she knew Sandra was only trying to push her in a direction she thought was best. One evening, after an uncomfortable dinner where Sandra had again hinted at the need for children, Aisha felt her frustration boil over. She took a deep breath and decided it was time to be honest. "Brian, Mama," Aisha began after a long silence, "I know you both want a child, and I want that too, but I need you to understand something. It's not just up to me, it's something that will happen when it's right. Pressuring me isn't going to help." Brian looked at her with understanding, his hand gently resting on hers. I know, Aisha, I'm sorry if my mom has been putting too much pressure on you. We'll wait until the right time, okay? Sandra sat quietly listening. I see, she said slowly. I guess I've been too eager, but I want what best for both of you. Despite their progress, Aisha couldn't shake the feeling of doubt that sometimes crept in. Was she truly ready for the responsibility of motherhood? What if she couldn't give Brian the child he wanted? What if Sandra was right all along? One evening as she sat alone in the living room, Aisha had a heart-to-heart with herself. She had been so focused on pleasing Sandra and living up to everyone's expectation that she had forgotten to listen to her own heart. Maybe it wasn't just about having a baby for Brian or Sandra. Maybe it was about her own readiness to become a mother when the time was right. Aisha's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. It was Brian. I thought I'd find you here, he said, stepping into the room and sitting beside her. Just thinking, Aisha replied, forcing a smile. Brian gently took her hand. About what? Everything. About being a good wife, a good mother. I don't know if I'm ready, Brian. I'm afraid that I'll disappoint you or your mom. Brian squeezed her hand. Aisha, you don't have to be perfect. You're already doing great. And I'm not going anywhere. We'll figure this out together. You're not alone. As the moments went on, Aisha felt herself growing stronger, more confident in her role as Brian's wife. She had stopped worrying so much about Sandra's approval and started focusing on the love she shared with Brian. Then one morning, Aisha received some news that will change everything. She had missed her period. She wasn't sure what it meant, so she decided to take a pregnancy test just to be sure. When the test came back positive, Aisha felt a mixture of shock and excitement. She was pregnant. She immediately called Brian, her heart racing. Babe, you need to come home. I have something to tell you, she said, barely able to contain her excitement. Brian rushed home, and as soon as he saw the test, his face lit up. Aisha, is this real? Aisha smiled, tears of joy in her eyes. Yes, I'm pregnant. Brian pulled her into a tight hug, spinning her around. We are going to be parents. They laughed, cried, and kissed each other, in that moment overwhelmed with happiness. The news of Aisha's pregnancy spread quickly through the house, and when Sandra found out, she could barely believe it. For the first time in a long while, Sandra looked at Aisha with genuine admiration. I'm so happy for you, Aisha, Sandra said, her voice trembling with emotion. I'm sorry for everything I put you through. You're going to be an amazing mother. Aisha's eyes filled with tears, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming feeling of being truly seen. I couldn't have done this without your support, Mama, Aisha replied, her voice soft but steady. And just like that, the walls that had once divided them began to crumble. As the days passed, Sandra became more involved, helping Aisha prepare for the baby's arrival. She even offered to help with the nursery, painting the walls a soft, calming blue. It was a new chapter in their lives, one filled with hope, understanding, and the promise of a better future. Brian, Aisha, and Sandra had come a long way from misunderstandings and harsh words to acceptance and love. And now with a baby on the way, their bond was stronger than ever. The days grew longer, and Aisha's pregnancy began to show. As the months passed, her excitement and nerves grew in equal measure. There were days when she felt overwhelmed by the thought of becoming a mother, but when she looked at Brian, her heart swelled with love and reassurance. He had been by her side through everything, and now together they were preparing for the arrival of their baby. Sandra too had become more involved than Aisha ever expected. She was no longer the cold, distant mother-in-law who made sharp comments at every turn. Instead, she had become a loving and eager grandmother-to-be. One afternoon, as they worked together to assemble the baby's crib, Sandra turned to Aisha with a soft smile. I never thought I'd be here helping you get ready for this, but I'm glad I am. I see how much you love Brian, and now I see how much you love this baby. Aisha looked up at Sandra, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, Mama. I've learned so much from you. Sandra shook her head, a small laugh escaping her lips. I think you're both learning from each other, Aisha. Their bond, though still evolving, had become something stronger than either of them had imagined, and with each passing day, they grew closer. As Aisha's due date approached, Brian and Sandra decided to throw a baby shower for her, and the whole family was buzzing with excitement. The house was filled with decorations, balloons, streamers, and gifts piled high. It was a day that Aisha had longed for, a celebration of the new life she and Brian were bringing into the world. Aisha sat in the center of the room, glowing with happiness. Sandra stood beside her, proudly helping to hand out drinks and snacks to the guests. It was a beautiful sight, one that Aisha never imagined would come so early. As the day went on, Aisha received advice from every angle, from friends to family, but the most touching moment came when Sandra handed a small gift, wrapped carefully in gold paper. This is for you and the baby, Sandra said, her voice soft and full of emotion. Aisha smiled as she opened the gift, revealing a handmade blanket. It's beautiful, Mama. Thank you. Sandra's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. I made it myself, Aisha. I wanted it to be something special. Aisha's heart swelled with love as she hugged Sandra tightly. This means so much to me. Thank you for everything. It was a moment Aisha will never forget. The moment when her relationship with Sandra finally felt like that of a real mother and daughter. As Aisha's pregnancy entered its final stages, she couldn't help but feel both anxious and excited. The waiting was the hardest part. She had prepared everything from the nursery to the baby's clothes, but now all she had to do was to wait for the big day. One night, as she lay in bed next to Brian, she felt a sudden sharp pain in her lower back. It was brief, but it took her by surprise. She sat up, rubbing her belly. "Brian, I think it's time." He shot up from the bed, his eyes wide with panic. "What do you mean? Are you sure?" Aisha smiled softly, her heart pounding. "I'm pretty sure this is it." Sandra was the first to arrive at the hospital, her calm demeanor surprising both Brian and Aisha. She had become so supportive, and it was clear that she cared deeply for the well-being of her future grandchild. As Aisha was wheeled into the delivery room, she felt a sense of peace. She was ready for this new chapter of her life, ready to welcome her baby into the world. After hours of labor, Aisha finally gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. The moment she held him in her arms, her heart expanded in a way she had never experienced before. This tiny little person, her son, was now part of their world. Brian looked at their baby, tears in his eyes. "He's perfect, Aisha. He's everything we've ever dreamed of." Sandra, who had been waiting anxiously outside the room, rushed in as soon as she was allowed. She gazed down at her grandson with a look of pure love and joy. "He's so beautiful, Aisha," Sandra said, her voice trembling. "I can't believe he's finally here." Aisha smiled, her own tears flowing freely. "Thank you, Mama, for everything." Sandra gently took the baby from Aisha's arms and held him close, her heart full of pride. "I'm so proud of you both," she whispered. The family was whole now, Aisha, Brian, and their precious son, with Sandra there to support them every step of their way. It was a new beginning, a fresh start. Months passed, and life with the baby was both challenging and fulfilling. Aisha had never been more exhausted in her life, but she also had never felt more complete. Brian, Sandra, and even the extended family were all there to help, showering her with love and support. It wasn't always easy, but Aisha knew they had come a long way. She had found a place in this family, and Sandra had found us as a loving grandmother. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, Brian, Aisha, and Sandra watched the sunset in peaceful silence. The baby slept soundly inside, and for the first time in a long time, Aisha felt a deep sense of contentment. "Look at how far we've come," Brian said happily. Aisha smiled. "We really have, haven't we?" Sandra sat beside them, looking at her son and daughter-in-law with pride. "I never thought it would turn out like this," she said softly, "but I'm glad it did." Aisha, Brian, and Sandra sat there in that moment of quiet happiness, knowing that the future will only bring more love, more challenges, and more memories. Together they had built a family, and nothing could break their bond they had formed. And so their story continued, one filled with love, understanding, and the promise of many more beautiful moments to come. This story highlights a harsh reality in many relationships today. Family interference can make or break a marriage. Many couples face pressure from in-laws, unrealistic expectations, and deep-seated family conflict that can lead to resentment and even separation. The biggest lesson here is that a marriage is between two people, but outside influence, especially from controlling family members, can create unnecessary tension. If partners do not set boundaries and stand together as a unit, their relationship can crumble under the weight of external pressures. It also teaches that change is possible, but it requires effort from both sides. Sandra only changed because Aisha remained patient, while Brian supported his wife. Many relationships fail because one partner refuses to stand up for their spouse, allowing toxic family behavior to drive them apart. At the core, this story reminds us that love alone is not enough to sustain a marriage. It takes mutual respect, communication, and the ability to protect the relationship from outside negativity. A strong couple must learn to navigate family drama together or risk losing everything they've built. Thank you so much for watching. Your support means everything. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Stay tuned for more exciting tales coming your way. See you in the next one, besties.